Hey, hey, hey! My name's Helen the Cryptid, or Nephilim if you'd prefer. Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. Today, I will not be reading something with loads of angst. It will be fluff galore, including dadzawa. This is Shades of Green, written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. Before we begin, here's the summary of this one-shot. Your soulmates, Midoriya realized, and they both nodded. But now you have two. What does that mean? He asked nervously. Soulmates aren't necessarily romantic, Hisashi spoke up, voice surprisingly steady. That's all people focus on these days, but the colors just tell us that the other person's gonna be important to us. Sometimes they're platonic, sometimes familial. He trailed off. In a world where people can see every color except that of their soulmate's eyes until they meet them, Shota thought he knew what green looked like after falling in love with Hisashi. That is, until he meets the eyes of a certain problem child. A certain problem child who happens to be in dire need of parents. Just another dadzawa and dadmic fic for your soul. Enjoy! Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers who might be watching this video. Even if your children aren't your own biological ones, you should still be appreciated today. I didn't realise how perfect it was to upload this video today. It was luck, but let's pretend I planned this out. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, Maybe It's Friendly, on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah! Shades of Green. Shota thought he knew what green looked like. Ever since he first locked eyes with Hisashi all those years ago, and the world filled with a brand new colour, trees coming to life all around him, the grass, no longer plain white, becoming a chartreuse ocean. He'd thought he understood the beauty of the colour. Hisashi made the world more lovely just by existing in it. And the shades of green that Shota now got to experience served as living proof of that. Because that was what he was. Life, pure and joyous, and so filled with kindness and warmth that he made Shota's heart feel like it was going to burst just being in the man's presence. He liked to think that even without the shock of suddenly seeing a whole new colour, he would have known Hisashi was everything he'd ever wanted and more just from how happy the guy made him. They'd go for walks through the park, hiking through forests for training. They'd really just wanted to go on a camping holiday, and he filled the house with potted plants, carefully placed out of reach of the cats, so that everywhere he looked he was reminded of his husband, and the love that they shared. It used to make him nervous, how beautiful the world that Hisashi showed him was, when all he could offer was the dark abyss of his irises. At first he was scared that he'd leave him because of it, back when he could just say, "It's over," and walk out of his life without having to go through any legal processes. And then he took Hisashi on a date one night and walked up a grassy hill and then a picnic dinner. It was the most romantic thing he'd ever set up, and he had a lot of help from Nomuri to make it work. They watched the sun set over the city, and then lay back on a blanket and stargazed. He pointed out every constellation he knew, holding Hisashi's hand so they could trace them together, connecting the dots from so many miles away. It wasn't until Hazashi started crying and thanked him that he realized quite how perfect the evening was, because without the darkness of the sky, he'd never been able to see the stars before. It was in that moment that Shota knew Hazashi wasn't going anywhere, and he didn't. Years passed. He proposed on that same hill under the same starry sky. They got married, the happiest day of his life, as he got to look into those golden green eyes and show everyone what he already knew. This one's mine, and I am his. He watched his husband grow with so much pride it was overwhelming. First as a spotlight hero, he rose up the ranks, and then even more so when he started his own radio show. Shota knew he felt the same about him as he grew to be one of the most well-respected underground heroes in their profession, even though most things about him were such a mystery to the people he worked with. He didn't need them to know him, didn't want them to. Hazashi did, and that would always be more than enough. And when Nezu approached them offering jobs at UA, it just felt right. Hazashi was so good with kids, and Shota was so determined to improve the standards of heroics that it was only logical to accept. So they did. Together. They helped shape the next generation of heroes, and despite how apathetic he often seemed to his students, he loved watching them grow and improve. He had no time for those unwilling to do so, but for those who put the effort in, he did everything he could to prepare them for a career in heroics. It was frustrating at times, as he saw them struggle, but rewarding when they made it, and he knew there was one more competent hero in the field. There were times when it was almost too much. When a past student of his got hurt and he would lie awake wondering if he could have prevented it if he just taught them better, when he'd stayed up going over and over his lesson plans with all the ghosts of those who didn't make it in mind. He nearly quit on several occasions, but as he stared into wide green eyes, he was so glad he stuck it out, because they were green eyes that looked nothing like Hazashi's. They were far wider, huge, and shining up at him, but that wasn't what caught his attention. They were a darker shade of green than his husband's, a richer colour than he'd known existed before. Even though he could now see it in the distance, the world around him shifted, as the new shade created contrast among the trees, some darker than others to extents he'd never realized possible. And when his gaze focused back on the boy in front of him, he realized his hair was the same vibrant color, not the white he'd thought it was when he sat in the middle of his classroom that morning. There were tears pooling in Midoriya's eyes, and Shota released him from his capture weapon in a panic, thinking he'd hurt the child who was supposed to would be so important to him. But when his gaze stayed fixed on Shota, he realized that he must be experiencing the same thing. Darkness creating shadows and adding little details to their surroundings. Aizawa-sensei? The kid stuttered, a couple tears finally escaping. He wanted to wipe them away, ruffle his fluffy hair, it looked so soft, and just talk to him. But he couldn't, not right now. He forced himself to break eye contact, continuing the assessment in a daze. He kept glancing over at the kid, whether it was to check on him or to reassure him that his hair was really that colour, that such a shade existed. He wasn't sure. As soon as they completed the last activity, he pulled the scoreboard up, realizing with a jolt of panic that the student who was going to be so important to him was in last place. He couldn't expel him, he just couldn't. So he made something up about it being a logical ruse, and felt just as relieved as Midoriya looked. He sent the other kids back to the changing rooms and walked Midoriya to Recovery Girl's office. She raised an eyebrow when he walked in and tutted, muttering something about injuries on the first day, Eraser, really? He ignored the snide remark, waiting impatiently as she healed him. Thankfully, because it was only his finger, he didn't need to rest. And Shota wordlessly escorted him to the teacher's lounge. Midoriya was muttering and twitching beside him. He kept shooting anxious glances up at him, but Shota had to know first that this wasn't just him. The idea that Hisashi didn't share this bond with the kids scared the hell out of him. He had no idea how they'd proceed if he didn't. Shota pushed the door open, huffing a laugh as Midoriya hesitated just outside. "Come on, you're allowed in, kid. You're with me," he told him monotonously, too busy scanning the room for his husband to put any semblance of effort into sounding energetic. Hisashi was easy to find. What with his ridiculous hair adding a good foot to his height, he waved enthusiastically when he saw Shota and bounded over to say hello, pausing when he spotted Midoriya peeking out from behind him. "Hey, Eraser! Hey, little listener!" He grinned and Shota felt his heart stop. He looked directly at him. They must have made eye contact, but he hadn't reacted in the slightest. "Okay." Hisashi looked concerned, but followed nonetheless, smiling again at Midoriya, who was starting to look as green as his hair. Shota led them to Hisashi's classroom because it was more nicely decorated than his. His husband had claimed something about making the kiddos feel more welcome, but Shota secretly thought it was just because he loved to decorate. He was responsible for pretty much all the random knickknacks that their cats loved so much, and as such was usually the one to clean up the pieces when they were inevitably swiped onto the floor. He pulled 3 chairs into a little group and sat down, frowning as Midoriya bit his lip so hard he was on the verge of making it bleed. Shota reached over and poked his chin, startling him into looking up from his lap, eyes wide and confused. He poked him again, closer to his lip this time, and he blinked as he realized what he was after, letting go of his lip with a small pout. Shota shouldn't have found it as adorable as he did. He looked back at his husband, who had watched the whole exchange, a bewildered expression on his face. He raised an eyebrow in silent question, and Shota struggled to find the words. In the end, Midoriya spoke up so he didn't have to. "Your eyes are dark," he whispered nervously. "I didn't know a color so dark could exist." Hisashi's eyes widened at the words. "Neither did I." He spoke just as softly, the lack of volume so out of character that Shota felt himself panicking again. How? I don't understand." "And the green of your eyes," he said quietly. "I've never seen that shade." Hisashi's gaze flickered between the two of them, and Shota couldn't bear to look him in the eye, too afraid to see his reaction. "You're soulmates," Midoriya realized, and they both nodded. "But you have 2 now." "What does that mean?" he asked nervously. "Soulmates aren't necessarily romantic," Hisashi spoke up, voice surprisingly steady. "That's all people focus on these days, but the colors just tell us that the other person's gonna be important to us. Sometimes they're platonic, sometimes familial," he trailed off. I don't I don't have a family. The kid choked out, and Shota internally cursed himself for forgetting. He'd read Midoriya's file. He knew he lived in a group home, kicked out by his own parents when he was little. It had made him so angry. How could anyone just abandon their kid? Does this... He struggled to find the words, but they both already knew what he was asking. Does that mean you're gonna be family to me? He whispered the last words like he couldn't possibly comprehend the idea, and it broke Shota's heart to hear. All he wanted was to say, yes, absolutely, and hold him tight, but he didn't get to make that decision on his own. He looked over at his husband, the question unspoken but clear. Are we? Hisashi stared at him for a moment, and he could see the fear in his eyes. He knew his husband would make an effort to love anyone important to Shota. But the mere fact that he didn't have that connection created so much tension. Because how could anyone be as important to Shota as Hisashi was, and yet not be just as close to him? Hisashi frowned, creased eyebrows almost disappearing behind the rim of his hero glasses as his eyes welled up. I don't know. What does this mean? He looked to Shota for an answer, and Midoriya mirrored the action, but neither of them got one. He was staring, transfixed, at Hisashi, more specifically at Hisashi's glasses. Hisashi's tinted glasses. His heart was in his throat, and his hands shook slightly as he reached forward. Could it be? Was there hope after all? He pulled them off gently. His husband's eyes widened as he did so, the world no doubt becoming blurry, but all the colours brighter, no more orange hue to his vision. He kept his eyes locked on Shota's for a moment, afraid to look, to check, scared that it would just be the same as before, nothing new, nothing special. Hisashi swallowed nervously before turning to face Midoriya. He gasped instantly. Both their eyes welled up with tears, and Shota felt the swirl of dark emotions he'd been drowning in shatter as relief broke through. Wow, Hisashi breathed, reaching out to bury a hand in Midoriya's forest green locks. The kid looked slightly stunned at the action, but leant into it instinctively. He looks like a kitten, and Shota's heart couldn't take it. He and Hisashi made eye contact, and the blinding smile on his husband's face was all the confirmation he needed. Yeah, he said, smiling gently at the kid, a smile that normally only his husband got to see. I think we are. Midoriya promptly burst into tears and launched himself at Shota. Surprisingly strong arms latched around him tightly as he sobbed against his shoulder, and Hisashi laughed at the blank look on Shota's face as he processed the action, before wrapping his own arms around the kid, one hand reaching up to hold the back of his head. His fingers sank into the curls, and he felt his own eyes widen. They were even more soft than they looked. Hisashi mouthed an amazing, "I know," at him, over Midoriya's head, and chuckled, beckoning him over. His husband smiled again, his tears finally spilling over as he knelt beside the two of them, joining the hug. And if Shota's eyes got a little misty too, well, that's a family secret. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers who might be watching this video. Even if your children aren't your own biological ones, you should still be appreciated today. I didn't realise how perfect it was to upload this video today. It was luck, but let's pretend I planned this out. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. Maybe it's friendly. On AO3, I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah!